Good evening. You're watching The Big Story with Haryanto Duman. I'm Olivia Quay. If you're watching us on YouTube, please subscribe to the Straits Times channel if you haven't already done so.
The Health Ministry has preliminarily confirmed 0 new COVID-19 cases in the community today among the 408 new cases. The last time there were no community cases was on February 23rd. All of today's new cases are foreign workers living in dormitories.
The total number of cases here has passed the 35,000 mark at 35,292. More details will be released later.
As Singapore exits the 8-week circuit breaker, restrictions will be slowly lifted in 3 phases, months apart. Some may be unhappy with this gradual transition, especially when they're not allowed to restart their businesses or resume their usual lifestyle.
Let's discuss this further with Dr Hannah Clapham. She's an epidemiologist and mathematical modeler at the Swee Hock School of Public Health at the National University of Singapore. So Dr Clapham, thanks for joining us. Now, in trying to stabilize the number of community cases as Singapore reopens, what challenges do you anticipate in phase 1?
Yeah, so any reopening that's happening now is going to be a balance between trying to control transmission and also sort of allowing activity to continue. So one of the big challenges is going to be detecting transmission when it's happening and where it's happening, and continuing to do as good a job as Singapore has been doing so far of finding those cases and really trying to stop the transmission as it's happening. We of course have some measures that are helpful for doing that, the contact tracing, the quarantine that's been happening, and now there's going to be a whole range of new measures in place as places open up. So the other big challenge is going to be identifying which of those measures are working and how they're working, and also then trying to decide, okay, if we're finding places where transmission is still happening, what measures need to be put in place further or stronger in order to kind of try and stop that transmission happening.
Doctor, given the current infection numbers and weighing them against the risks, is it the right time for Singapore to exit the circuit breaker?
Yeah, as you say very rightly, it's very much a decision made about weighing the risks and the transmission. And so what we're seeing in Singapore, which is to me really reassuring, is this slow reopening of what's happening. So we're not seeing a suddenly, tomorrow we can all go out and do lots of activities. It's going to be this slow reopening that leads to hopefully a control of the transmission and a more measured approach to reopening than we're seeing in some other countries.
So, Doctor, do you think it's the right time then for Singapore to exit the circuit breaker?
Yes, I do. And I think, there's always going to be uncertainty. One of the big things that's an issue with this current pandemic is that we're having to make, or governments are having to make decisions based on a disease that we're still learning about and based on data that they have at the time. And the Singapore government has been doing an excellent job of that so far. And so it seems like a sensible approach that they're taking so far.
Great. Well, the authorities are expecting a jump in community cases when more activities restart from tomorrow. So if the government pulls back on what's allowed during phase 1, what measures do you think will be reinstituted first?
Yeah, this is a really, really tough question, and one that, everybody wants to know, right? We all want to know what we can do and what we will maybe not be allowed to do again. Honestly, it's going to be based on what's seen. So, the measures that have been put in place and the places that are being allowed to open are being allowed to open because they're thought to be the safest places and the measures in place to control transmission. But as I said, this is something that we're still learning about. And so what we're going to see in phase 1 is probably quite a reactive and honestly, over the next few months, everything's going to be measured, but also going to have to react to what's seen. So a lot of the measures that have been put in place around workplaces have been put in place because the Singapore Ministry of Health has very good information on where transmission has been happening and how it's been happening in workplaces. And so now the workplaces are opening with new measures in place. They'll be continuing to monitor that, and then we'll be able to say, okay, we haven't quite got this right, or this isn't working quite how we thought it would. And so they'll then be addressing the areas that need to have further measures in place. So unfortunately, I can't tell you exactly what's going to be happening.
Now, Doctor, let's look forward a little bit to phase 2. Now, the government said it will decide later this month if phase 2 can start in end June. Let's say the number of community cases remains low for the next couple of weeks. Is it still a long enough duration to determine that we are ready to move on to phase 2 by the end of the month?
Yeah, so again, this is a really tough decision. So what we know from the disease is that there is, of course, a lag between when transmission is happening and when we start to see symptomatic cases because of the biology of the disease. There are ways of testing and strategies that can try and get around that. So that's part of what the government will be doing. They'll be putting in place screening strategies to try and understand as quickly as possible what transmission is happening. The other thing to think about is that in the sort of understanding of what's happening in phase 1, there are kind of 2 reasons that we want to know what's happening there. One is whether, are there lots of cases starting to happen, which means that the health systems, we cannot deal with more cases that could be happening in phase 2. So that's one of the reasons that we want to be monitoring it. And the other is that the opening in phase 1 will help understand, as I said, the transmission that's happening, and therefore could be able to guide what's happening in phase 2. So both of those reasons are really important reasons to have the excellent surveillance and monitoring that's in place.
Well, Dr. Clapham, we want to move on to asymptomatic cases, which still remain a concern among all of us. So, from May 18th to the 28th, at least 27 out of 57 cases found in the community were asymptomatic. Can we draw any inferences from the number of asymptomatic cases out there?
Yeah, so asymptomatic transmission is a really important part, it would seem, of the COVID transmission, and that's one of the reasons why it's been really hard to control. So one of the things that we want to know is, firstly, there can be 2 reasons that someone's found to be an asymptomatic. It could be because they're pre-symptomatic, so they go on to develop symptoms, or it could be that actually they have a whole infection in which they develop no symptoms. So those are 2 slightly different things, and sort of when we're looking at the numbers that are coming out, we want to know, and we need the follow-up of those cases that are found asymptomatic to know which of those groups those are in. From terms of transmission, actually, those groups are quite similar, except for perhaps the truly asymptomatic might have a longer course of infection in which they will not be showing symptoms and therefore will not be picked up. But that asymptomatic transmission is the reason why it's not sufficient to just isolate symptomatic cases, why we need to have the quarantine, why we're starting to have to wear face masks when we go out. The other thing to note here is that we're finding now asymptomatic cases because we're looking for them. So the testing strategies in Singapore are changing now as the government was thinking about reopening, was trying to understand more about what was going on in certain pockets of the population. So at the beginning, we were very much just testing symptomatic people. So of course we didn't know about asymptomatic infections, whereas now the screening that's going on will pick up asymptomatic infections. And the final thing to think about when we're thinking about what this means for the whole population is that from studies here and in other places, it's becoming clear that not only does disease severity vary by age, so not only are you more likely to have a severe infection, you are probably also more likely to have a symptomatic infection depending on different age groups. So, if we're currently screening large groups of the working age population, we might be picking up more infections than if we were screening sort of older people. And so that's another thing we have to think about when we extrapolate kind of to the whole population.
Right. So that said, Doctor, are you concerned about these newly detected asymptomatic cases?
No, I'm not. I think that, once we started to do screening in the way that it was being done, they were going to be picked up. We knew sort of from studies here and in other places that there were a large amount of asymptomatic infections. The important thing is going to be sort of, understanding what that means in terms of transmission and the measures that need to be continue in place.
Well, Dr. Clapham, thank you so much for taking the time to speak with us. We've been speaking to Dr. Hannah Clapham from the Swee Hock School of Public Health at NUS.
Also in the headlines, commuters can expect regular train and bus services as the nation gears up to return to work starting tomorrow. The Land Transport Authority said today the train and bus intervals during peak hours will return to pre-circuit breaker levels, while train operating hours will also return to normal. Selected bus services serving mainly discretionary or recreational areas will continue to be suspended.
Muslim couples can choose to make their marriage vows in person from tomorrow, but the number of attendees will be capped at 10 and solemnizations through video links are still encouraged. The Islamic Religious Council of Singapore said yesterday that physical Muslim marriage solemnizations will resume first at the Registry of Muslim Marriages building from tomorrow, then at designated mosques from June the 13th.
The Singapore Press Holdings Foundation is donating $300,000 to the community chest to support seniors, disadvantaged families, and the disabled, among other groups. This comes as the COVID-19 crisis enters its 5th month since the first case was reported here in January. The donation is part of the foundation's annual charity giving, which usually takes place around August, but has been brought forward in recognition of the need for earlier aid among tougher economic conditions. In other news, in findings released today in an OCBC survey conducted during the circuit breaker, 2 in 3 working Singaporeans and permanent residents said they don't have enough savings to allow them to maintain their current lifestyle beyond 6 months if they were to lose their jobs now.
Around half had already suffered wage cuts, were prescribed no-pay leave, or had their commission earnings reduced. So let's discuss this further with OCBC Bank's Executive Director of Investment Strategy, Vasu Menon. Vasu, what were your first reactions to the survey findings? Is it worrying that most working Singaporeans won't have enough savings to last them more than 6 months?
It is worrying indeed that most Singaporeans will not have enough savings to last them beyond 6 months, but it's not totally unexpected. Because if you look at the survey, 47% of the respondents said that they suffered some form of income reduction, either because of no pay leave, because of lower commissions, because of a reduction in wages. So that may have impeded the ability to save as well. I think the other things that caught my attention that is rather worrying is the fact that, number one, I think 40% of the respondents who are investing said they plan to reduce their investments going forward, and 55% said that they plan to reduce their savings. Now, I think it's very important to save and invest because many of us, work towards life goals in the future, things like getting married, purchasing a house, having children, sending them to university, planning for our own retirement planning. So it is very important to just go beyond just emergency savings, but also to save and invest for our long-term future. To me, what caught my attention, which is rather heartening, was the fact that 20%, or rather the people in their 20s, what I found was many of them who are probably have a reputation for being impulsive to some extent, came through quite positively. They indicated they plan to save more, invest more, and many of them indicated an interest in taking on online courses to upgrade themselves. So there was a silver lining in the survey as well.
Right. Vasu, these findings, are they simply because of the unique COVID-19 situation that we're in right now? Say, for example, in any other time, would Singaporeans have enough savings to last them beyond 6 months?
I don't think it's completely unique to COVID-19 because we did a survey last year for the OCBC Financial Wellness Index, and the same thing came through, that the respondents did not have sufficient funds, emergency savings, to provide a buffer. So I think going forward, it's very, very important for individuals to make sure that they save. I think perhaps COVID-19 is a wake-up call. I mean, gets the respondents, perhaps people in general, to wake up to the fact that they need to save more. That means cutting back on your non-essential expenses, putting aside more savings, perhaps even itemizing your savings. I mean, that may help. When you itemize your savings, you get a better idea of where the expenses are, and that helps you to cut back. Then, of course, you can bolster your resources by investing, of course. And when you invest, then that also provides more financial resources for you to fall back on in the future. But clearly, what's happening now is not unique, and it's something that Singaporeans in general have to be more prepared for in future.
Right. Well, you mentioned some measures that each of us can do to save. So, do you have any other advice for us as we try to tide through this economic downturn?
Well, I think it is at the end of the day, there are no easy answers to this. It's really a combination of making sure that we are very careful in the way we spend, that we are prudent. And this will come to pass. I mean, COVID-19 is not going to be with us forever. I mean, it'll come to pass. I'm optimistic of that. And better times will return. But even when better times return, I think it's important for investors, for people in general, to watch what they spend on, cut back on non-essentials, save, invest, grow their savings, and plan for their long-term future. I think those things are very, very important. And I think we are here to help. I mean, banks like OCBC, even other banks and financial institutions, we've got experts within the bank who can actually take you through your finances to make sure that, they are relatively strong and that you're prepared for a secure, longer-term future.
Then what about in terms of our economic recovery? What does this mean to our economic recovery when 2/3 of working adults here say they don't have enough savings?
Well, again, I think COVID-19 is not a fixture. I think this will come to pass. I'm very optimistic of that. I think when that happens, the economy will slowly get back on its feet. Income levels will start improving. Individuals will hopefully save more. They'll have more income in their pocket to spend as well. And that will give the economy, I think, a bit of a boost. But bear in mind that the Singapore economy is not just driven by consumer spending, domestic consumer spending. It's also driven by other factors. Exports, trade is a very important part of the Singapore economy. Foreign investments, important part of the economy as well. Tourist arrivals, the services sector, which also depend on tourist arrivals. So various components to the economy, not just consumer spending, but I think consumer spending will also pick up once we go past COVID-19 and the economy recovers and people have more money in their pockets to spend.
Right. Well, thank you so much, Vasu, for speaking with us. That was Vasu Menon from OCBC Bank, where he's Executive Director of Investment Strategy. Let's go to Dylan Ang for the top global headlines.
Thanks, guys. The head of a Milan hospital has said that the coronavirus is losing its potency and becoming much less lethal. He said the swabs taken over the last 10 days showed a viral load in quantitative terms that was extremely small compared to ones taken 2 months ago. New infections are continuing to fall in Italy as it unwinds some of the most rigid restrictions in Europe. In Indonesia, a 100-year-old woman has beaten the coronavirus, making her the country's oldest survivor. She was discharged from hospital after a month of treatment in her hometown of Surabaya. With more than 2 million jobs in the Philippines lost due to the pandemic, President Rodrigo Duterte is offering cash and goods to encourage city dwellers to move out of the Manila region. As part of an ambitious program called Back to the Province, it aims to reduce overcrowding in the capital, where health, transport and utility services have been overstretched. Families approved for the program can receive as much as 110,000 pesos or just over 3,000 Singapore dollars in cash and goods. Officials said almost 60,000 people have applied since the plan began mid-May. That's all for our global updates. Back to you guys.
Thanks, Dylan. And now, as tempting as it may be to click on a link for gossip about your favorite celebrity, think twice, thrice even, before doing so, especially when it sounds too ridiculous to be true. These multi-stage fraud schemes, dubbed the rabbit hole, use the names of local brands and celebrities to target Singaporeans in an elaborate plan to steal their personal data.
Victims are enticed to click on fake ads featuring brands, individuals or current affairs before being led through a maze of page redirects to a fake survey. They're asked to fill up these surveys with their personal and payment information with a promise of a voucher or entry into a lucky draw.
Recently, these fraudsters have also exploited the COVID-19 pandemic, using news of it as clickbait. Journalist David Sun joins us now to tell us more about these schemes. David, for a start, could you explain how these rabbit hole fraud schemes work and how are they different from others?
Hi. So in usual scam cases or phishing cases, what you'll get is like a link in your email or maybe your WhatsApp, and then you click it and they straight away like ask you to download something or input information. But this is slightly different. This is a case whereby people want to share the links. You are told that share it with 5 friends before you can get the link, and each of these links are individually generated. So it's not whereby you can share one link and then it's the same link as everybody else. Everybody has a unique link, and they usually use baits like celebrities, news articles, politicians even. So when you click it, it seems real because all the pages are generated just for you, leading you through multiple redirects. And when you get to the survey page, I mean, it's something we've all had, right? With everything going online now. Put your details here, sign up for a lucky draw or a voucher, and it's very enticing. I mean, the way they sell some of these things.
Right. Could you share some examples of these fraud schemes, David?
Oh, so some examples would be like recent ones claiming that, oh, this is a Bitcoin investment scheme, whereby you click here and this is verified by the Straits Times or by the newspaper, but in fact we don't write such articles. And things like M1 and using celebrities like Brian Wong. And then you click, and then you end up on this like survey page. Let's say the one by M1. It says congratulations, you're one of the selected few. You have a chance of getting the new latest iPhone or that kind of thing. All you have to do is just put in your information and your credit card information and just pay $1, and then you have a chance to get the phone for free. So what people do is they'll pay that $1. Some people actually do fall for it, and then they'll be charged that $1. So immediately when they get charged that $1, they're just like, hey, they only charged me $1. So this seems to be real, and I'm not going to think about it for the next few months. You'll just think like, oh, I just got myself a place in the lucky draw or the chance to get a voucher. But in actual fact, a few weeks later, like less than a month later, you'll probably get a much larger charge on your credit card bills.
Yeah. No, it seems that these frauds, like you mentioned, they look legit, enticing, and also innocuous. Are these multi-stage fraud schemes more difficult than to tackle as compared to other types?
They are, which is what I was explaining. So when you have a link, when you click on it, it's actually a redirect. It uses multiple resources. So everybody's link, when they click on it, is different. You get a different promotion in that sense, or rather you think it's a different promotion, so you think it's skewed to you. And so there's just very little ways of shutting it down. I mean, sure, it's like the way Group IB, which is a cybersecurity company who discovered this, described it as like it's like killing a hydra. It's like trying to chop off one head, but it ends up becoming two. So that's what all these redirects do. And according to them, the only real way you can tackle this is by using AI.
Right. So, as as the average person, how can we and brands even avoid being victims of these schemes? What can we do if we are caught in one of these?
Okay. So this is like there are two separate issues here. One is brands, the other is individuals. For brands, I think it's very difficult for you to avoid being used in that way. In fact, the public relations expert I was speaking to was saying that, if somebody is using your brand as part of a scam, you should be flattered because your brand has big enough clout and weight such that people will want to fall for it. For individuals, it's slightly different. For individuals, there are a lot of things you can do. When you click on a link and you see multiple redirects and you end up at a page that asks you to key in your personal information, you really should not be doing something like that. In fact, you shouldn't even be clicking on random links that people send to you unless you can really verify and you know who it's from. And most importantly, do not just key in your information online, especially your personal data, even if it's not your credit card data, even if it's just your personal data about where you stay, how old you are, where you live. All this data can be used to phish and target you in other scams.
Well, good advice there, David. Thank you so much for taking time off to speak with us. We've been speaking to journalist David Sun. Now, always be circumspect about anything that requires you to give your personal data. Let's go back to Dylan for what's also in the news.
US cities are fearing more destruction as protests against police brutality continue, sparked by the death of George Floyd. Despite curfews imposed on several cities, violence continues to spread, with protesters taking to the streets in Los Angeles, New York City and Atlanta, among others. Yesterday's clashes in Minneapolis marked the 5th night of arson, looting and vandalism in Minnesota's largest city. The state's governor said on Saturday that he was activating the full Minnesota National Guard for the first time since World War II. Nearly 24 hours after launching from Florida, SpaceX's Crew Dragon delivered 2 NASA astronauts to the International Space Station, the first US space capsule to do so with a crew since 2011.
Launch from Cape Canaveral, Florida was carried out one day earlier by SpaceX, the private rocket company of billionaire entrepreneur Elon Musk. The 2 Americans received a warm welcome from the current crew on board the ISS after executing an hours-long critical spacecraft docking. NASA Administrator Jim Bridenstine from Mission Control in Houston checked in on them after their long journey.
And I just wanted to find out if you guys got any sleep on your way up there the last, I'd say, I got 19 hours. Did you guys get any sleep?
So we did get probably a good 7 hours or so opportunity for sleep, and I did succeed at sleep, and Doug did as well. So the first night is always a little bit of a challenge, but the Dragon was a slick vehicle, and we had good airflow, and so we had an excellent evening, and just excited to be back in low Earth orbit again.
Back on Earth, pump operators here, Caltex and Sinopec, have lowered the price of petrol. Esso and Shell reduced rates by around 3 cents last Friday. However, SPC still offers the lowest prices, having resisted a round of increase by the others just 2 weeks ago. While its 92 and 95 octane petrols are the same price as the others, its diesel is 3 cents lower at $1.64, while its 98 octane petrol is $2.33, 3 cents lower than the next lowest prices. And finally, a Singaporean woman who was diagnosed with breast cancer while in the US arrived back in Singapore over the weekend, after the public raised money to fund her trip home. With no commercial flights, a 26-hour flight back to Seletar Airport by air ambulance was the only option. The Straits Times highlighted the fundraising campaign last Monday, which later saw almost 4,000 donors raise about $373,000 for Miss Lorraine Liu. That's all we have for what's also in the news. I'm Dylan Ang.
Thanks, Dylan. Those are our top stories for today. For more news and videos, visit straitstimes.com and subscribe to our YouTube channel by hitting the red button below.
Once again, I'm Haryanto Diman with Olivia Quay. Join us tomorrow for more stories on The Big Story.